renew our partnerships with the rest of the world, Europe will not be relevant.
We can make it if we are together as Europeans.
Development and looking ahead to what is next.
Do you genuinely believe that countries will manage to reach these very ambitious targets?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carlo Martuscelli, economy reporter at Politico, and you're watching Politico Live, the live extension of our nonpartisan journalism. Today, we're going to be discussing Europe's quest for competitiveness. Competitiveness and economic prosperity are set to be the core of the EU's next five-year agenda. In response to growing concerns over the economy, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen laid out a series of programs to boost Europe's economic performance relative to its main rivals. She's laid out a clean industrial deal, a competitiveness compass, and a union of skills, all within the first 100 days of her mandate. These initiatives echo the EU's leaders' call for an integrated single market and are aimed at creating a larger workforce so that small businesses can be leveraged to increase Europe's competitive edge in a changing security context. We're going to be discussing all of that soon, and we will sit down with Executive Vice President Roxana Minzatu, leading the work on the Union of Skills. Then we'll hear from a high-level panel diving into the macroeconomics of labor, capital, and migration. But before we begin, I'd like to thank the Roma Foundation for making this event possible. And a big thanks to all of you, our audience, whether you're in Brussels or online. At Politico, we like to keep these conversations lively and interactive, so you can submit your questions via Slido using the hashtag EU Competitiveness Quest. EU Competitive Quest. Questions with a name and organization will get priority. We want to hear from you right away, so please take a moment and answer the poll presented by the Roma Foundation for Europe. And the question is, what should be the European Commission's top priority to boost competitiveness? We'll look at the results at the end of the discussion. To kick things off, we'll play a short video produced by Politico's studio team together with the Roma Foundation for Europe. Then we'll hear from its president, Željko Jovanović.
Out of 6 million Roma, 1/3 are young people. So this is an immense potential. We are a population that should be seen as a case for investment in our labor force through education. We, as a community, want to be and can be part of the solution.
Ca tânără romă aflată în rolul de învățătoare, mi-aș dori să inspir copiii din comunitatea mea și pe cei de etnie romă, dar și pe ceilalți de alte etnii.
Željko, do you want to now take the stage?
Thank you very much. I wish you all a very, very warm welcome. We are honored to have you here, and I will just provide a little bit of context of why a Roma organization wants to talk about competitiveness. So first of all, for those who don't know much about Roma, the Roma, in the name of Roma Foundation for Europe, doesn't stand for the capital of Italy, just to be sure about that. So it is about the biggest and most resilient European minority. We are about 12 million, 6 in the EU and 6 in EU accession countries. The foundation builds on 30 years of work and support of open society foundations to the Roma minority in Europe. Unlike other people who see the Roma communities, our communities, only through the lens of prejudice or through the lens of victimhood, we see our community as a community of beautiful, strong, proud, resilient people with potential. And this potential is not only about symbolism, it is real. That's why we wanted to have you here and convene a conversation about competitiveness. Because for Europe is exactly the value proposition this organization brings to the table. So let me start with the problem. European Union loses 2 million workers every year, and that's a projection for every year in the next 15 years. And at the same time, while facing labor shortage, you have the Roma minority, which is disproportionately younger than any other ethnic population in Europe. We have, in some countries 2, in some other countries 3 times bigger share of young people in the Roma population than in other countries. So our population also being multilingual, because we had to learn different languages to survive all this time in Europe for centuries. We are also very adaptable. We can adapt to the most adverse of situations. And we are also very young, as I said. So having this potential in Europe, it makes no sense to waste it, especially when Europe needs every worker it can get. Even the strongest, or one of the strongest economies in Europe, Germany, needs 400,000 workers to maintain its competitiveness. So here, I hope you could pick up on the entrance. We tell a story that shows that if we only invested in skills, competitiveness of the Roma workers, and their equal and fair access to jobs, only in 3 countries where we have the highest share, Romania, Bulgaria, Slovakia, the opportunity for national GDP is going even to 10 billion euros per year. That's a story that you can find here in terms of the key numbers, the key arguments. And I invite you to pick it up and see it. So looking at this opportunity, it made us very clear that we need to get into the conversation about competitiveness, which is the top line of the Commission and European Union today. Europe basically needs the Roma for its geopolitical and geoeconomic competitiveness. This is a story we wanted you to hear. We wanted to get into the conversation with Executive President Monzato and our great panel today, and I hope this is the story you will carry with you. We are grateful to have you here, and let us not waste the 10 billion euro per year opportunity. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Enrico. I'm now delighted to welcome Roxana Minzatu, Executive Vice President for Social Rights and Skills, Quality Jobs and Preparedness, for her first interview with Politico. Executive Vice President, thank you for joining us here today. Before we begin, I just wanted to ask you to respond to Enrico's comments that he made just now. Are we leaving valuable human capital on the table at a moment when we're facing a mounting demographic crisis? And do we need to do more to reach out to the Roma community and include them in the labor market?
Oh, I would totally agree as a Romanian, even more so, that Europe has so much untapped potential, human untapped potential, and it is, of course, about the Roma population, which is vibrant and dynamic and young, but it's also about women. It's also about migrants. It's also about persons with certain disabilities who could be such a huge contribution and talent for our workforce. That's why I really, having in mind the fact that I've never worked directly in the world of education, but I'm really convinced and sold onto this, ingredient that we want to place in the recipe for competitiveness, that is skills. I think skills is not a magic pill, but of course, it is the type of investment that can unleash this potential that we are, but just the right kind of investment in skills at the right time, with the right context. So of course for Roma, we have always been looking, and I've worked on that in Romania with European Social Fund Plus. We've looked a lot at how we should support the communities of Roma from this perspective of fighting, discrimination, of pushing towards inclusion, which you can define in so many ways. But I think we need, of course, and whenever there's a sense of urgency and of emergency, you start to see things with a different eye. We really need to understand that we need a new paradigm. And again, I've worked on types of policies that worked and some that did not work. So the lessons and the failures, like with entrepreneurship, I think should be understood also in public policy, is that you need to change the angle, you need to change the perspective. And to unleash potential, you need to have a positive agenda. So we've discussed with the Roma Foundation, actually had a good meeting on how we do this, how we build this positive agenda towards investing in these groups that have huge talent, but need more investment in basic education, more investment in vocational training, but targeted for certain types of jobs. And I think that we're going to have an interesting pathway forward, since I am very keen to pilot and to test the types of interventions that would then be able to be scaled up in our EU-wide policies.
Great. Well,
yeah.
Thanks so much for that. Your portfolio centers, among other things, labor and employment.
Yeah.
And for decades now, the US has been the top destination for the world's smartest and most talented people. And many of America's largest multinationals are headed by foreigners, including Europeans. Recently, though, the headlines have been filled with stories of students being arrested and deported, travelers being held at customs and harassed. So as the Trump administration hardens the national borders, and we're hearing about these foreign-born researchers and scientists starting to look elsewhere for places to work and live, what is Europe doing to capitalize on this opportunity?
Well, first of all, I will say that I think a lot of us agree that, raising walls and building barriers between us is a lose-lose situation on the short term, on the medium term, and on the long term in many ways, not just economically. And history has shown this over and over again. We just need to be able to, again, look into the lessons where we failed as humanity, as societies, and just do better. And I think we can look at how commerce and trade and barriers, removing them or accentuating them, influence our progress as humanity, as society. And Europe, I think, has now this mission to, of course, tackle this disruptive environment where it's expected out of it to be more competitive, more agile, but also a safe haven, because it is a champion. It is a champion of freedom, of equality, of diversity. So to be a safe haven for those that really need freedom in order to study, to research, to innovate. And I was thinking about Europe's challenges because at the same time, we have issues with our productivity, with our economic competitiveness, but then we have this space that we, I think, need to, not just want to fill on the global arena until I think things will settle down. We are this athlete. I mean, Europe, in the hearings for European Parliament, I said this. It was a comparison that I created thinking about a Romanian gymnast. She's Nadia, and she won the first perfect 10 in gymnastics years ago. So I thought, Europe is the same kind of athlete, but it needs to, to win the competition, and it needs to train. It needs to be agile. How will it train? What kind of athlete will it be? Will it be an athlete for just one race? Will it be an athlete that endures, that is able to stay in the leading positions for a number of competitions? How will it train? What kind of ingredients? These very chemical ingredients, or very good lifestyle and a good resilient type of training. So going back from this comparison to how Europe, I think, is reshaping its behavior now, it needs, I think, Europe to pin down or to re-emphasize what is of the essence: human dignity, respect, equality, and investing, in human capacity and in talent. And there's different perspectives there. First, the need to invest in the basic skills, the reskilling and upskilling of our own Europeans, and then the ability, looking at also at the huge gaps that we do have in terms of, innovation, in terms of deficits for certain industries, from construction to IT to, very STEM-oriented industries, how we attract skilled, talented, innovative people to Europe. These two need to be balanced also politically. I have these conversations in member states, in the European Parliament, with you, with different stakeholders. What do you do as European Union? Do you take care to invest in your own human capital, in your native, the Roma, the women, the youth? You have such high youth unemployment. Do you focus to bring back talent from outside, be it United States, be it India, be it... How do you do the youth talent pool? Do you want to, focus on legal migration? And these, of course, trigger different reactions. And as I've mentioned, Europe as an athlete, I think, needs to find the common language between all these options and to instill them into this type of behavior that means, in the end, putting people first. What kind of competitiveness? Yes, one with less bureaucracy, more simplification, better technology, easier access to capital. But first and foremost, the quest for competitiveness is a journey. What is the journey? It is a journey with people, with the employers, but also with the talent, with the workers. And then we always need to think, as we invest through the Union of Skills, through Erasmus, through the European Social Fund in the skills, what is beyond the goal? We are talking a lot about competitiveness, and I feel sometimes the need to translate it as I speak with students, with children in schools, with people from disadvantaged backgrounds. I mean, you go and speak in neighborhoods affected by poverty or in Roma communities about competitiveness. We need to translate this into how we are intending to support their education, their job opportunities, and how is this going to stay, beyond reaching in 5 years' time, in 7 years' time, a certain economic goal, a certain productivity goal, a certain position in the global charts. This is, by any means, this cannot be the whole story. The whole story is always how you integrate investment in people step by step, and how you empower them, and how you make them own the journey for competitiveness.
So you mentioned lowering barriers right at the start of your response. In the US, we're seeing barriers go up. And I think today we've witnessed a lowering of a barrier with what used to be a country in the European Union. I'm talking about the UK. Obviously, there was an agreement signed between Europe and the UK, which I believe also involves the Erasmus program, which is, of course, such a great, one of the real trademark policies of the European Union that people are familiar with, that people who have, gone to Spain or gone to France on, their year abroad in university, everyone remembers their Erasmus year. So can you tell us about what happened today with the UK and more generally what's going on with the Erasmus program?
First of all, I'm super happy that we did have a very important step forward in our EU-UK summit with the willingness of our UK partners to go towards an association agreement for Erasmus, for the ability of our Europeans to go and have mobilities in the UK, and of course UK students to come to the European Union. Erasmus is clearly part of our European DNA, and I would say Erasmus is part of the national DNAs as well, because it is the way through which you understand yourself better as a Romanian, as a Spanish, as a Portuguese, and in a European context. The willingness to really be able to retie these knots for the young generation is extremely important for me, and my team will do our utmost to really go forward with this direction. Also today there was a very encouraging discussion towards creating this visa facility for youth exchanging young generation, the young people want to go and not just study, they want to study, but also to just simply travel or to work or to volunteer or to do au pair, all these experiences that shape not mine youth, but maybe many of yours. I mean, this is European experiences that need to be, open for us. UK and European Union, I think we are part of a common roots, and our shared history really needs to be celebrated with the younger generations. Going a bit to Erasmus, I don't know how many of you did have an Erasmus experience in your lifetime. Maybe hands up if I can ask of you.
Oh, wow. Really, it seems like
so
half
almost
the
the entire room. I should have asked who did not.
Yeah.
I did not.
Actually, no.
So guys, I think that Erasmus is clearly one of the best known brand programs of the European Union. It is about freedom, the freedom to circulate, to study, to get to know each other, respect diversity, and it is about getting better skills and working together closer. And my question ever since, I've started designing a bit the future of Erasmus, because we are preparing the budget for 2028, 2034, but looking a bit beyond. What is Erasmus in the context of preparedness, internal security? It's such a strong tool to fight disinformation, misinformation. It's such a strong tool to fight fake news and to create a shared, a shared understanding of our European Union identity and of our national identity. So my question was always with my colleagues and with colleagues in DG Employment, but I mean, Erasmus, wouldn't it be normal for each young girl or boy or to have an Erasmus experience by the time they're in high school, by the time they're in university? So I will tell you that although this is not a goal that I can politically translate now in the current budget necessarily, my ambition and my vision is that Erasmus needs to be accessible to each of our children and each of our youngsters. And it is my opinion that
is this being discussed at the
this is
high level of the Commission?
This is let's say, a political vision that I share with my colleagues, and of course, towards that we work. It's not something that's agreed upon, but we've seen
Erasmus for all, maybe.
Erasmus for all before it's, I don't know, it sounds at the right time. The timing matters, University is amazing, and we want to keep university component and mobility high, and I will do my best on that because I work very well with university alliances. But I've seen what it means for children 12 years old, 30 in the gymnasium, in high school. It's the timing, it's the right moment for them to understand, what is the European Union, what is freedom, how we learn together. So I think we need to invest in Erasmus for all, but at a younger age, when the right seeds planted really allow for our young generations to keep up this political support of a continent of peace and prosperity. Because while our parents and grandparents, have lived the experience of Second World War and the years after, and the need, out of fear, out of necessity, to build this project, for the young generation, and again, I go back to my own country, which I know best, of course, born after we joined the European Union, or even some years before, or even for my generation, it's not as obvious. What is the benefit of the European Union? What would it be the big deal if we're inside or outside, that the margins very involved, not very involved, if we make Europe stronger, or we let it be, a little bit loose? These are important questions, and for these questions to be addressed, we need, not just TikTok, not just Facebook, not just Instagram, not just online. We need real European experiences. So, yeah, this is my vision for Erasmus, and we are working towards it.
So we've built Europe. Now we need to build Europeans, to misquote Cavour. A question about what you just said about Erasmus. Do you think if we had Erasmus for all in yesterday's Romanian elections, the pro-European candidate won, but George Simeon, if I'm not mispronouncing his name, he got 42% of the vote, a lot of the vote. Do you think we could have reduced that, or not? We could have. I'm not pro or anti-EU, but could Europe have, or Brussels, seen that vote share reduced if more young Romanians went on Erasmus?
That kind of metrics is a bit beyond how I see things, because in the end, elections are about different views, the freedom to express your opinion, the freedom to be positioned, and the participation through the voting. What my take is from yesterday's elections in Romania, actually, is the huge number of people that voted overall and the huge number of young people that voted. So I've seen some statistics. I hope that I don't quote wrong statistics, but still I've seen them, as I was in Romania to vote, I've seen them around. Out of 3.6 or 7 million Romanians that are between 18 and 34, so the young people, some 2.5 or 2.6 million voted. I don't know if it's the most since the fall of the communist regime, or at any rate, this is the kind of outcome you want, first of all, for the young generation, for all generations, to be participating in the democratic process, to understand the importance to vote, not to say no to a right for which, again, our ancestors in different ways and moments have shed blood, or others fought in the streets, and we shouldn't take it for granted. So this would be the kind of metrics: how many of them participate and how many of them involve in volunteering. We have Erasmus, you have the Solidarity Corps, there's other kinds of metrics as well. But beyond that, the quality of our political and economic life also, I think, depends on programs such as Erasmus. We introduced, in order to also complement this discussion is not only about mobilities and cooperation, we've introduced in the Union of Skills, and I invite you to read the communication, the 5th basic skill, which we call it, but it's just a name, what's in a name, the citizenship skill. But it is a skill that I want all of us together to work towards. It's important to know how to read, to know how to do math, to know science, to have digital abilities, basic at least, and to have, a minimum threshold. But we need to know how to function as citizens. And again, this might seem a bit obvious, but it is actually not so easy. You need media literacy. You need, to understand a lot of things. Many of them we can instill through Erasmus, through other measures, through other financing, through other joint political commitments from your member states, from communities and regions. So again, I wouldn't say that we measure it in the voters for a certain political party or another, but we measure it through the number of the young people that get actively involved in democracy, in their communities, in countries, hopefully in the European Union as well. I think, at least for me, as I've crossed a bit the border between the young and whatever I am now, adult towards old, the saddest thing was, because I'm a transition generation as well from my country, to see this lack of interest in the young people, this lack of interest towards politics, towards European politics, towards what is keeping us, the oxygen that keeps us as societies functional. And there's nothing, I think, more exciting and interesting than to see young people engaged. But yes, we want them to have the right context, the right information. And I will tell you, it's not about only educating on citizenship and having media literacy trainings, and it's also about doing the right history lessons, the right basic education, and the quality of the educational systems that is important.
Thank you so much, Executive Vice President. I think we're at the end of our time, or is it?
No time to talk about, competitiveness in economic terms, but I have to be back then, I guess.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. It means you'll have to come back soon to do a second interview with Politico.
Sure.
I believe our time has run out because that watch here isn't working. Can someone from production confirm to me? Yes, we're done. Okay. Thank you so much. That was lovely. Yes, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you for listening to us. And I do invite you to join the labor of, I wouldn't call it of love, but surely of faith in the ever-changing reality of our European Union. I was a bit carried away by Erasmus. It's just the top of the iceberg of a bigger conversation about how we need to revalidate, reinvent, re-understand ourselves generation by generation. And so thank you for giving me the opportunity to just broadcast a few of these ideas.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Many thanks.
All right. Now we are going to broaden the conversation, and I'm going to invite our panelists to join me on stage. I'll read out your name, and then you can join me. First, we have Adriana Sukova, Deputy Director General of the Commission's Employment Directorate. Adriana? Sorry. Yes, we have a yes right there. Yes, thank you. We have Georg Rikos, the Associate Director of the think tank European Policy Center. Thank you, Georg. We have Barbara Rambusek, Director for Gender and Economic Inclusion at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And finally, we have Diederik de Schatzen, ALDE's party's Secretary General. Hi, Diederik. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me today on this panel. Now, the way I like to open up these discussions is just with a rapid-fire quick question that I ask that you respond to in less than a minute, and then we'll move on to the real heart of the discussion, and maybe we can just go starting from my left, just around the table. And the first question is, what do you see as Europe's #1 challenge when it comes to leveraging the labor market to improve Europe's economy?
Well, thank you very much. It's a very difficult question because it's not only one.
Sorry, is her mic being picked up?
Oh, it's fallen.
Did it?
It's fallen. No. Do you hear me?
Ah.
now?
Take the hand mic.
Do you no, I think it was fallen. Now you hear me?
No? Okay,
Sorry.
let's do it
Okay,
like that.
I'll take the mic. Even better. In fact, this question doesn't have one answer because it's quite a complex thing. We have people who are, as our EVP mentioned, underrepresented on the labor market, which need activation, but for that they need additional measures, not the standard one. We need people who are really allowed and facilitated to move across member states, because there we have people with skills in one country, but the demand for these skills is in another. And making the transition quick and easy is a very important support. We need to also think about our young people. Young people. Okay. So
that was a minute.
Sorry for that. But,
no worries, no worries.
No, and also attracting talent from abroad, I was going to say. That's all. Thank you.
Over to you.
Thank you. I'm not a labor market economist, and I won't try to contradict Barbara. But sort of just a quick answer. I think obviously what we need to speed up in Europe is our capacity to do tech and innovation, and hence we need a labor market for that. We need to get people with the right skills, whether they come from internal in the EU or from outside, into our clean rooms, into jobs of manufacturing technicians, into not only universities, but beyond universities, the startups that become scale-ups, that need to become industrial leaders. So, and there I think there are plenty of examples of how we're really struggling in Europe.
Barbara?
I'm Barbara.
Oh, sorry, Andrea, Barbara,
But
sorry.
doesn't matter. Okay, so I think if I had one thing in terms of how we can really mobilize the labor market, I would actually say we need to bring private sector, we need to bring employers more closely into this conversation, because it is about the skills, it's about innovation, it's about digital technologies, green technologies, etc. And it's the private sector, it's employers who in a way benefit from that, but who also need to be part of shaping what kind of skill standards, what kind of opportunities can be created, and how can, for example, partnerships between education providers and employers really accelerate that journey and get people not just educated, but then also into the right jobs at the right time in order to innovate and for the economy to grow.
Great. Diederik?
Well, Carlo, first of all, we have to point out that competitiveness is more sexy than before. Huh? I did a couple of these debates, and this turnout is really good. The answer to your question is quite easy, and we'll go into details, but we have to first of all, improve our single market. There's still a lot to do. It's been a bit forgotten for a couple of years. We have to finance this competitiveness. There are ways there where if you're looking at points on how we are so substantially different than other superpowers like the US and China, it's in financing. That's definitely one. And then one where everybody used to, even those who disliked it, trade is now again the importance of trade, and the fact that trade is power is important. And these are the three keys to improve, and I'll go more in detail later on. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a funny definition of one on this panel. Adriana, competitiveness is the name of the game, this Commission's mandate, as you mentioned, Diederik. The Commission has launched a number of policy initiatives to this end. We didn't really get a chance to dive into the Union of Skills with the Executive Vice President, but I know it's one of several measures. Can you give us a rundown of the Commission's plans and what are its overarching vision? I mean, labor markets are traditionally something quite, sensitive for capital. So, how's Brussels stepping in here? I'm sorry.
Probably, so I'm not.
I'm going to give you this.
I'll use the mic. In fact, you are putting two questions, not one.
Yes. See, it's me as well.
You see, so I'm not the only one who counts more than one. In fact, the Union of Skills is a recent initiative of the Commission which is quite overarching because it goes to introducing a strategy for basic skills, going through upskilling and reskilling, attracting talent, improving the process of recognition of qualifications, because this is one of the issues limiting the mobility of people in the European Union nowadays and restricting the access to the labor market of some people, not to talk about people coming from third countries where the complication is even bigger to have their diplomas and qualifications recognized. The Union of Skills also will have a communication next year, the recommendation on this recognition of qualifications for regulated and non-regulated professions in order to ensure that everybody with the right skills can find their place on the labor market in Europe. We also have an obligation and a commitment to support the alliances that have been announced in the Net Zero Industrial Act about batteries, about solar panels, about raw materials that have already been launched, and these are indeed public-private partnerships. They engage universities, they engage private companies, they engage national authorities with the attempt to ensure that the same curricula is applied in all countries, in all partnering universities and secondary vocational education and training institutions, allowing for a quick, immediate recognition of the qualifications achieved through these academies. And this is, you know that educational institutions are very subsidiary principle applicable, so it cannot change easily the curricula of one school in one country to match the curricula of another school in another country, but the university alliances are working to get to their high-level education, being also delivering the same skills within the same profession, no matter where this was acquired. And talking about funding, our EVP mentioned European Social Fund, which is currently planning and implementing about 46 billion euro across Europe for skilling, upskilling, and making sure that people have the right skills needed for the labor market. But the need for the labor market comes from our private companies. They have to be very clear what are the needs, and also we have a forecasting process with the CEDEFOP agency, which is looking at the forecast of skills for the different sectors in the labor market in the next years, which is also guiding on how to ensure that training institutions provide the skills that will be needed.
So I just had a question on that point, which is, and maybe you've actually just answered it, but I'm going to ask it. So in the 90s and early 2000s, like reskilling was seen as a big solution to the some of the problems created by globalization and the China shock. You know, this idea of taking, you know, coal miners and turning them into office workers for the new economy. But I think in hindsight, we've judged these policies to be less successful than we'd hoped. So when you're talking about upskilling or skilling, what are the lessons we've learned from the past in designing these policies?
Well, there are a lot of lessons learned, and that making education closer to the needs of the businesses is good, putting them together and getting better understanding what are the skills needed and how these can be developed and delivered faster. And I want to give an example of a lesson learned of putting partnerships together, like our Pact for Skills, which was, I just have the latest data. The Pact for Skills, which was created in 2020, it was launched in 2020 with an obligation or commitment by over 3,200 organizations to invest in skills development that have joined the Pact. And the survey for 2024 shows that there are more than 6.1 million people who have received training within the Pact for Skills. We have 20 large-scale partnerships, sectoral partnerships, and they have trained 30% of their workforce on average. So it means that getting educational training institutions, national authorities, and private businesses together brings much better and much quicker the results that we need.
Great. Okay, thank you. Barbara, I wanted to take a step back now and just look at the macroeconomic perspective. What's the state of Europe's labor markets, and what are the big challenges that policymakers are having to tackle?
Okay, so if we look at Europe, there are a number of different challenges that we face when we look at all these questions that we just discussed about skills and youth, etc. So one is skill shortages, and we know that about 3/4 of companies actually can't find the people with the right skills that they need in order to innovate and grow. That is a number that should really sink in. I mean,
this is where the skilling comes in,
exactly.
I guess, yeah.
So that is, you know, a huge number, a huge challenge. And if we look at SMEs, for example, the number would be even higher, because SMEs don't have the capacity and the sort of resources in a way to invest. So that's one thing. The second area then is skills mismatch, because we know that about 30% of all workers are employed in jobs that either they are overqualified for or underqualified for. So that match to get people into the kind of jobs where they can add the most value is not happening very well. So that, I think, is another huge issue. Then if we look at the kind of new skills that are required, I mean, our economies, as we see, are changing rapidly, almost on a daily basis. If we look at the advancements of AI in particular, this is happening at a lightning speed. And I think in Europe, we are not fast enough in terms of adapting, both on the company side, to really understand how those technologies can add value to economic growth, but also on the skills side, because we are constantly limping behind. Another area is green technologies. I think there's a lot more investment going into adopting green technologies, but across different sectors, and particularly when we look at SMEs, the capacity to understand what kind of technologies would be most suitable for a business, to then find the finance and also find the skilled labor force, is something that is not happening in Europe in the way that it really could and should, if we want to be successful and competitive. And then the final point I want to make is about mobilizing human capital that exists in Europe, because at the moment, I think we're still very selective, too selective, in terms of who really gets the best education, who gets the best opportunities. We need to mobilize people who are maybe not in the labor force or not active in the labor force, and that includes the Roma population, you know, the young people there, and the huge potential that they can offer. It includes women. It includes an aging population. It includes also migrants that travel across Europe, and we see in some countries, in some parts of Europe, a sort of depletion of labor markets, a combination of outward migration, aging populations, and low female workforce participation. So these are the areas where we really just need to look at how do we do business, how do we engage with schools, with TVET providers, with education university providers, to get these young people, or these people generally, into education and training, and then, very importantly, to funnel routes into employment. So that's just a number of issues. I mean, we could, of course, talk longer, but just to put some of the key points, which I hope give food for thought for the
No,
other
well, that's great. I mean, one of the points you raised is exactly the point I want to put to you, Georg, which is, you know, if we were to look at outside of Europe, at successful examples of countries tapping these international workers, these migrants, for human capital, you know, are there any examples we should be looking at? Are there any countries that stand out, or even countries within Europe actually that have done this really well? I mean, I know the ECB put out a report recently showing that migrant labor has been hugely additive to the GDP of Spain, for example. So yeah, I mean, do you want to respond to any of that?
Well, again, I think probably that's a question either Barbara or Andrea could answer better than me. But I mean, everybody who looks at the overall macro figures know that we need more workforce in Europe going forward, absolutely. And we're facing different rates of demographic decline, and so that workforce and skilled workforce needs to come from somewhere. But I mean, you'll have the sort of the better figures and examples of that. What I think is quite interesting in this sort of overarching macro conversation in this moment we're in now in Europe is that we have plenty of sort of nice sounding objectives. We're very good at establishing them, but I think really the crux now, the test for Europe is sort of going from this mission policy into a mission economy. And I think that's the real test of sort of von der Leyen too in the Commission now in translating all these strategies that have been coming out. And this is not only about skills. I mean, if you look at the digital decade, or if you look at Net Zero Industry Act, or if you look at our climate targets, essentially these are all equations that don't add up, because we don't manage to have the economy and send the signals, and that's one way of putting it, to an economy that follows the impetus of policy. And I think that is part of the conversation one needs to also have about what needs to happen now at the EU level, because you ask about comparison. Well, yes, we talk about competitiveness. Competitiveness is, there's a strong element of comparison. We're comparing ourselves to others, and as the EU, we need to compare ourselves to the US and China. US and China, what they have put in place are economies that I qualify as being about massive scale resource mobilization to size up in terms of geopolitical and economic power players, but also to meet these transitionary challenges. If you look at the US, under President Biden, it was the Inflation Reduction Act. That was about massive resource mobilization behind core competitiveness goals, not least. China is doing exactly the same. Trump might not be a big fan of the Inflation Reduction Act, but if you look to his Stargate AI fund, it's also about massive research mobilization. And I think that angle there is something we are, in a year where we need to see the MFF proposal and so on and so forth, are not comfortable enough talking about when it comes to trade-offs. Because if you look at the previous period, the economic policy of the EU was about two propositions that were ambitious and difficult, but essentially synergetic. The Green Deal and the digital push. Now we're in a world of trade-offs between security, economic security, competitiveness, climate change, nature preservation, and all this requires money. And that's, to tie this back to the first intervention we heard from the Commissioner, I'm all for this idea of this can-do spirit and talking Erasmus and all of that at the same time. But in reality, the questions we're facing now is, what do we have to choose to really go faster, and what do we have to do away with? And we won't be able, on the 1% budget or 1 to 2% of GDP budget at the EU level, to do everything at the same time. So I think in terms of the big macro discussion of what the EU needs to do, that's the kind of conversation one need to be having here.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, we're going to return to that point about financing and where to find the money, because that's always the main point ultimately. But just before we do that, I did want to just ask one last question about migration and human capital. To you, Diederik, and it's a political question, which is, if migrant labor is one way to boost Europe's economy and improve competitiveness, how can defenders of, let's say, comparatively more open borders, at least, vis-a-vis what Washington is doing, make their case to the public? I'll give you a practical example. How do you tell a 30-something-year-old Italian who is or underemployed that it's a good idea to let, say, a top graduate from India, for example, into the country because a high-end engineering firm needs talent? How do you make that political case?
On the various interventions on labor, there were two things. Georg said at one point Europe is very good with several points and then not on implementation yet, but even these points and these objectives weren't there a couple of times ago, so I'm already quite happy that these points are at least on the agenda. Maybe I'm the optimist. And then on my numbers, when Barbara mentioned that it's 75% of companies that report a lack of skills, I was going to make a whole point that about 60% already complained about lack of skills, so it's even more. Meaning that the only word I haven't heard, and it's going to get back to your point, is education. I listened quite carefully, and that is where there is a sincere mismatch also. It is on what we need, the link between the educational universities, high school, technical education, and the links with the market is not sufficiently existing. And so that is part of why, indeed, we need to complement in form of either low-skilled or high-skilled, because this link between education and this link between the employers is not sufficiently established. And I say that because, was it 2 weeks ago, we had the EYCS there, the Education Council. We have about 8 ministers of education from my political family. And this reflex is really something that not even doesn't exist, but sometimes is even alien, where they say, why would a university meet with the private sector? Well, this is maybe what you should do too, is not only meet with the institutions, with the political, but directly go to companies and say, what can we do what is it you need? If there's 60, let's say 75%, what about numbers? If there's 75% of people that don't find it, what do they need exactly? And that's what I would say to the 37-year-old Italian, is that right now there is a mismatch. And that is something that we need to fix, and that is why we need to compensate this mismatch. Barbara.
If I may just come in on that, I think that's absolutely spot on. And I think organizations and investors, for example, such as EBRD, we exactly try to come in here and to be a catalyst, because we invest, we have a public mandate, we invest in companies across a broad range of sectors, and we provide the finance. But actually, when we look at human capital, we work, for example, with the European Training Foundation, with CEDEFOP, to bring that private sector engagement we have, and in a way use that leverage we have with the private sector through our financial partnership with them, in order to basically create a voice for them to shape national skills on education, so through sector skills councils, that can be, skills standards, occupational standards, dual learning programs, but to also really look at what are the needs today of employers. So when we actually then look at training provision, etc., this starts with the employer and with a job, and then sort of working backwards. And I think that's also one of the lessons that we have learned. If you train thousands and thousands of people in, ICT skills, and then wish them good luck, and into the labor market they go, it's very hard to convert those skills into actual employment. But if you start with the jobs, and if you start with employers and engage them as part of an investment to invest in green, digital, whatever technologies, then you can really shape it, because
this is like the German model, basically.
It's linked. It's very similar to the German model. But I think when we look at investments, and you mentioned also finance earlier, we need to build a focus on human capital and on this sort of leveraging of the private sector into how we make investments.
I wanted to come in on this point because indeed the connection between education and business is not straightforward. But there are examples that work well, and I mentioned the partnerships where the commitment by big companies has taken place in training their workforce, but also students not already graduated. I'm sure that there is still much to do. Clearly, we're not there yet, but the connections are there. And one element of the Union of Skills, which I didn't mention because you were pressing me all time, is the establishment of a high-level board, which will have practitioners on it to discuss how we start with adjusting our basic education, going through vocational education and training, tertiary education, and lifelong learning and upskilling and reskilling throughout the work life of everyone, so that we do propose the right measures that can speed up this process. And you asked about why things have not happened and where the problem of businesses are. I just want to also announce that tomorrow there will be the 4th or 5th, I'm not sure, omnibus suggestion for simplification of rules that are related to implementation of EU legislation, which aim at reducing the administrative burden for companies so that they can really take away anything that's unnecessary now, because there are things that are obsolete, frankly, and focus on what matters. So priority setting is already on the agenda of what are the most important things, how should we approach our situation now, and clearly we cannot live without strategies. I'm sorry. I have the experience of having very good projects which are not part of a more global framework or strategy, which didn't deliver because they were not mainstreamed afterwards, they were not taken up, they were not widely applied, and then all the good results are lost. So for me, in order to have a stability and continuation, we need strategies. So
okay, that's great. I wanted to move to the financing part now. Georg, I'll go over back to you. I mean, you mentioned scale and massive mobilization of resources. So we're seeing a more activist role of government in directing capital to projects. Industrial policy has been used to spectacular success in China, for example. But sometimes these projects also fail, and that's just the name of the game. I'm thinking of Northvolt, for example. So what are the lessons in terms of industrial strategy that Europe should be taking, both from maybe its previous failures and also from its successes, either in Europe or abroad?
Well, first of all, I just want to say, I'm not saying we don't need strategies. I'm saying that at some point we can have too many of them and implement none of them.
We should have as much as we need.
Exactly, and I think we can agree on that. And now, so yeah, to financing and that competitive angle. You mentioned Northvolt. I think it's an interesting case. Europe, the EU, has tried really what we should. I've tried to do to help emerge a European major actor within the battery industry, but it ended up failing. It ended up going belly up, and I think there are lessons, clear lessons from that. I would say sort of the fault doesn't primarily in any way live or lie with the EU instruments that, whether from through the Commission or EIB, that have been used to try to support there. I think a lot of the responsibility lies with the company itself, with the management, and with the project at the outset. It is an interesting sort of thing to reflect on. As I was listening at the podcast the other day with the former CEO, Carlson, I think he was told. And one of the stories he was telling was how he traveled to China at some point to see his main competitor, CATL. And he asked them, well, how many shifts are you working? Up here in North Sweden, we're trying to do 24/7 production. You guys are doing 24/7. How many shifts are you working with, of workers? The answer was 2.
Wow.
Whereas up north in Sweden, it's 5.
Yeah.
That already tells you a story about competitiveness or capacity to compete with China in terms of producing batteries. And there are others. There's the energy cost. That's clearly the capacity of bringing skilled workers up to northern Sweden. There's another one that's interesting that's highlighted in the Draghi report, and that is China today is deploying up to 4 times as much in state subsidies to push their industrial ecosystem and champions than any other major economy. 4 times as much, China. And of course, that's the problem we have with their overcapacities these days, and clearly an unlevel playing field. So I think one part of the lesson is if we are to compete, we need to try to compete on a basis or on grounds or on a baseline situation where we have some competitive advantage, be it in terms of energy cost or availability of skills or willingness to put public money behind because it's a race we have to win, and so on and so forth. And those kind of questions we are not necessarily that good at of asking ourselves in terms of industrial strategy yet. I think one needs industrial strategies, and I think we need industrial policies, not because necessarily they're the most efficient, but because today we're in a world where they create geopolitical facts. The fact that we will be left without any players in key tech areas and the key areas of the economies of tomorrow, it is a geopolitical problem in terms of prosperity and security for Europe. So yes, we need these policies, but then we need to be better at thinking through what kind of means we're ready to put behind to be in those races. And that brings me back to another the point I was making earlier. I think we are at the moment of, yes, unprecedented challenges for the EU, many fields, security and economic security and competitiveness. And I think there are some real lessons we need to learn from US and China in terms of the investment imperative. And it comes back to what I was saying. We have these objectives, but we're not good at translating them into a mission economy. And I think and of course, I'm not saying I'm inventing here anything. It's what the Commission, the IB, and others are trying to do. But it is now trying to focus EU money on where it can deliver results. That requires prioritization, finding out where there's real added value. It is about using EU-level investment to bring in private capital, which we're not that good at. And there are a number of concrete examples one can take also. There has been progress to invest in EU and those kind of things. But one aspect we're still not very good at is bringing in the national promotional banks. We talk about the EIB as the EU's climate bank. But if you look at the balance sheet of the EIB, I think it's 500 billion, roughly. The National Promotional Bank of Germany has a balance sheet of roughly the same, 500 billion. If you go to the National Promotional Bank of France, it has a balance sheet, I think, of 1.3 trillion. So over twice as much. And so I think part of the story now is and we can say a lot more about what the Competitiveness Fund is and should look like, but a part of that story is to say, okay, if we are setting ourselves these strategies and targets, how do we actually create the transmission into the different tools we have to make those objectives achievable?
So maybe I can take that point and pass it over to you, Barbara. I mean, there's been talks of Andriana. That's the second time we've done that. There's been talks of a saving and investment union, and I think the idea is to try and mobilize European savings and direct them to, SMEs or mid caps now as well. There's talk of this. What is the role of Brussels in directing these financial flows in a way that helps improve competitiveness?
I want to react on what Georg said. It's about our main competitor in industry is China. I agree. But we are not going to compromise on working conditions, on social rights and protection that we have been achieved in Europe just to be more competitive to China. No. Because I tell you that the European social model is the one that's really examined by everybody. And I've had discussions with some third country ambassadors who said, we want to be sure that with the announcement of our talent pool and talent partnerships, we want to enter in discussions with the European Union on what are the professions mostly needed. How can we provide legal migration of our population to Europe, because we know that when they come here, they will have exactly the same treatment as Europeans. When we send them to Middle East, we are seeing exploitation which we don't want to see for our people. So I'm really firm that the EU policy will never change and go downwards for what has been achieved at the level of social protection for workers in Europe. On the question about the Savings and Investments Union communication, which was adopted a month ago, I think, in March, we have a multi-pillar pension systems, and we want to be sure that savings can be mobilized for investments in Europe and not outside of Europe. But this goes through improving the financial literacy of our people, because that's clearly, again, we come to education. We don't have good financial literacy in Europe, proving or convincing people that they can be beneficial, they can make profit if they invest their savings, not in buying immovable property, but in buying shares and getting their additional pension rights in a fund which can multiply what they have contributed to. And this is one of the key and the first action that will be done already in Q3. There will be a financial literacy strategy, which will aim to empower citizens, raise their awareness, and increase their participation in the capital markets. We cannot force people to do anything unless they are convinced. And also, we will be working on developing the supplementary pension sector in a way that it is providing more choices for people, for their savings, but also ensuring that they are well protected. People will not give money if they're not sure that this money will be to their benefit later. We also have an European pension tracking service for pensions, so people who worked in different countries can trace what are their rights accrued. And also in Q4 of this year, we'll be preparing a recommendation for auto-enrollment in pension systems, but also we want to achieve a scale which will allow to be competitive for our pension investment funds, competitive in the world market, because currently the limited scale of what is available for investment limits innovation, limits the products that can be proposed. So towards the end of this year, we will have a review of the framework for our main pension systems and also pension products, the European personal pension products. They'll be coming this year as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Barbara, what are we seeing in terms of access to capital for SMEs and mid-sized firms in Europe? And are we seeing VC investment rising? Are we developing any innovative sources of financing?
So when we look at SMEs, I think we talk a lot about different EU programs and public finance programs and EIB and EBRD and all that. I think we have to understand that with public funds, we're never going to close the financing gap.
Sure.
So the question is, how do we use the limited public funds we have in the cleverest possible way in order to actually mobilize private finance? How do we fundamentally turn the market? And how do we turn the market in a way that creates opportunities for SMEs that would otherwise not have those opportunities? So if we look at young entrepreneurs, if you look at entrepreneurs in less developed regions, if we look at women entrepreneurs, if we look at SMEs also being able to invest in digital and green technologies in all these areas. So this is in a way where we at EBRD try and work with partners like the EU, for example, to come up with ways to do a number of things. One is to help basically partner financial institutions to better understand why investing in these SMEs actually makes business sense. What's the business case? Why is that profitable? The second then is to provide guarantees, and the EU is an important provider there, but also first loss risk covers, things like that, to allow partner financial institutions to pilot these approaches. And then the third, and that is a very, very important component, is to provide capacity building. That is actually relatively cheap if you look at the overall amount of finance that is required, but it's really important because if you want to change the behavior of the market, you need to build capacity to understand understand why that makes sense for financial institutions. So this is where data comes in. This is where understanding, for example, the extent to which banks already lend to women. Where are the big bottlenecks? Actually, women tend to repay more reliably, and it's actually a very profitable market segment. So why is it still seen as risky? Young people, the same thing, or investments in technologies that would allow SMEs to adopt green digital technology. So it's that capacity building that is really important. But I think we need to see our role as sort of catalysts in this way, rather than, you know, I could give you so many figures about the amounts of EBRD investments in SMEs. I mean, in a way, you know, this is very nice. But what's really important is when do we see that market shifting? So the one thing I will tell you is that okay, it's not in the EU, but in Turkey, we now have just celebrated 10 years of our Women in Business program, and so we did a bit of a deep dive. And what we did actually see is that partner banks started to invest a lot more of their own capital into this particular market segment because it is profitable. So we've seen a shift in the finance, not ours, but a shift in the private sector finance towards that. And I think that's exactly what we want to achieve and what we need to think about measuring as well when we look at success.
So kind of crowding in.
Crowding in. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I wanted to put a political question. To, jump in short. Yeah. I mean, we'll
no,
keep it.
ask your question first.
Okay, okay. Diederik, so on the one hand, we're seeing this rise in industrial strategy and state-led attempts at development. We're seeing it kind of across, you know, the US, Europe, and China. But on the other hand, there's also a renewed focus on cutting red tape and simplification, or, you know, as some might say, deregulation, although we're not meant to say that. Where do you think the balance should be in terms of policy making? Can we do both? Yeah.
We can definitely do both. And there is, nobody's doing regulation for fun. And regulation is actually useful also, especially standardization at European level has helped the single market. I used to have, you know, some have their Big Mac indicator. What's the price of a Big Mac? I have 10 years in European affairs. I had the joke of US invents, China copies, EU regulates. Used to be super funny 10 years ago. Now nobody's laughing at that joke because there is an element of first of all, it's not true anymore because now it's US invents, China invents, and EU regulates. But also it has reached a level that went a little bit too far. So I think I mentioned that single market is a bit forgotten. Maybe subsidiarity is a word that we should remember. We regulate where we can help them more. And so the element of simplification we have now at a very high level, an executive vice president of the Commission, Stéphane Séjourné, it's his top priority. And I think indeed it has to be prioritized. But I'll go back slightly also, if you'll allow me, to the financing, because a lot of good things have been said. I love the point of the savings and investments. That's a really important one. But you know, some have the Quran or the Torah or the Bible. Real competitive nerds, we have this, we have Draghi. And the numbers are actually in there. And it's not that scary. We need 800 billion of EU money. That's 1/5. And the rest should come from private spending. And so it is really the numbers are there. And so we have to also ourselves as individuals realize that with our savings, and by the way, you didn't mention numbers, I'll tell them. So we have 10 trillion in savings. These numbers always confuse me, but 10 trillion in savings. And what we need is 800 billion, and of that still even 1/4 should come from private. So the resources are there, but we need to see to invest in European industry. So that's where the money comes from. And I think that is really spelled out very elegantly in the Draghi report. It's a little bit more than what you asked for, but there you go.
No, it was great. It was great. Thanks so much. I do want to take one question from Slido. Unfortunately, it's anonymous, but it's a good question. And it's kind of a restating of the question I asked you about the 30-something-year-old Italian, which is, how do we balance the need for migrant labor, given the demographic trends we're seeing in Europe, with the political trends we're seeing in Europe, which is this shift to the right, a kind of anti-immigration populist right. I mean, it seems like, on the one hand, maybe you want to let more migrants in for the economy, then you might pay a political price. And I'm going to just open that question up to the floor. I know this is probably a question none of you want to answer because it's a difficult question, but I'm going to put it to you anyways.
Me directly?
Yeah,
Okay,
no,
thank you.
anyone, but whoever's brave enough to answer that question.
Well, first of all, a lot of the part of the migration is to help people to live, not those only who want to live better, and so there's no question about that. And economic one, I think the scale it represents is now not the threat. Not everything of what we're discussing about this is not either the only solution, nor it's the problem. So it's being blasted over for political reasons, as you mentioned, but everything we discussed here, which were quite operational points that could make Europe more competitiveness, including a skilled workforce, nothing that we mentioned, it's either a break or it's only an asset. So this is something where it is taken out of proportions by those who want to install fear, those who want to find easy solutions, because it would be wonderful if you can solve competitiveness. This debate would have been much shorter by blaming it on the migrants or say the solution is there. The reality is this was much more in doubt of some points, and it is part of a solution, definitely, but the proportions are being blown for political motives.
Do you want to come in on that?
I want to make 2 points on this. First, last year in March, the Commission adopted a communication on an action plan for labor and skill shortages. And one of the actions is, in fact, legal migration. And this was adopted by all the member states, by their ministers unanimously. My second point is that people are not against migration as such, but they are against illegal migration, which puts under threat democracy in Europe. Because legal migration is another way of filling a gap which everybody recognizes. And you quoted 2 million leaving the labor market a year, 1 million entering. So we have a net 1 million loss every year, which will never recuperate by solving a demography problem, which doesn't seem to be solvable very quickly. So people expect that when migrants come here, they first are used as a reasonable workforce with their skills that they possess, but also that they get the support to integrate not only on the labor market, but in the societies which they come to. And that's why it's much better than illegal migration, which absolutely damages our societies and also threatens the democracy in Europe.
Okay, well, thanks so much for that. So we are actually out of time. So thank you so much to all of you for joining me on stage and having this very interesting discussion. Before we go, I just wanted to take a quick look at the results of the poll. And just as a reminder, the question was, what should be the European Commission's top priority to boost competitiveness? And it is reskilling workers for in-demand jobs, which is what the Commission is doing. So that's great.
We still have the migrant talent.
Attracting migrant talent is only 6%. Yeah. But I do encourage everyone here to actually look at the ECB report on migrant labor, because it is very impressive actually how much migration adds to the economy. It shouldn't be underestimated. And I say that purely in kind of very neutral macroeconomic terms. To those on site, you're welcome to stay for a coffee, and we'll also have some food upstairs. And I'd like to extend once again a very warm thank you to the Roma Foundation for Europe for making today's event possible. Thank you. And we're going to see you again soon on June 5th for our next event on the Savings and Investment Union with Verena Ross, John Berrigan, and other fascinating speakers. So thank you so much, everyone. I'll do that. Yeah. I wrote a story.